Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a great summer so far. This is Julie Colgan. I'm super excited to be here today with my friend and colleague, Sandy from Valora, and to share an hour with all of you on our Ask Us Anything session. So this comes on the heels of a four-part webinar series that Sandy and I hosted around the topic of auto-classification. It was kind of a 101, 102, 103, 104 approach, taking it from what the heck is this thing and why should I care, all the way through what it is, how it works, and what the future looks like around these kinds of topics. So we had great engagement. I think we had about 600 people engaged in those sessions, and many of them were asking for more. And so we decided to put together this kind of fun approach, very loose, get together, chat session, jam session, whatever we want to call it. So Sandy, just make sure you're there. Can you say hello?
I am here. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to what is becoming, I guess, episode 5 in the 4-part webinar series that Julie and I put together. As Julie said, you were all very kind last time to say, yes, give us more. So here it is. We're going to do this like a typical Ask Us Anything. We invite your questions. The best way that you can do that is to type that into the little chat box, and that will show up, and we will take your questions pretty much, I guess, in the order received. We also had a couple that people submitted when they signed up, so we'll hit some of those. And there were some from other sessions that we either thought were great questions or we didn't get to at the time. So we've got all of those too. So this is going to be kind of an ongoing engaged Q&A, and we very much welcome your input on that. Julie, any other sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
I would add, it doesn't necessarily have to be about auto classification specifically. Sandy and I have been around this business a long time, and we've seen and done lots of things. So I know I personally would be happy to answer any questions that people have about kind of my background, how I got here, the things that are important to me, any of that kind of stuff. I'm happy to do to answer questions around. Can't speak for Sandy though.
No, yeah, that goes for me too. And in case for some reason you've just popped on for session 5 and you missed the other 4, if you check on Valora's website, I know we have a link to all 4 of them. They're on Valora's YouTube channel, or you could obviously get in touch with Julie or me. We have contact info at the end. We would be happy to share the preceding sessions, which date back almost a year, I think, at this point, Julie. So, feel free to reach out, on that. Anyway, if you did just join us, here's who we are. Julie is the Senior Director of Strategy and Innovation at Epic. Many people know her from her background there, as well as at prior organizations like Nuix. Julie is the sort of walking, talking embodiment of information governance. I thought I'd introduce you this time.
That's fine.
If you want to return the favor or take a pot shot at me, be my guest.
Yeah. So, Sandra E. Surkis is very formal. Is the president and CEO of Valora Technologies. She is one of the most fun people in this space. I really enjoy picking her brain, and I love it even more when we kind of disagree. She's a bright star in the group. So happy to be here with you, Sandy.
Likewise, Julie. And before we dive into the specific questions, we thought it would be fun for you guys to see. I don't know why we're missing session 4. Maybe we didn't run a poll in session 4. We were so deep in. But for those
we forgot.
All right, there it is. For those that were at the first 3 sessions, we had asked you all some polls, and I thought it would be fun to put back up what you said at the time. It was fairly consistent from time to time. Each of them, they were about 2 months or 3 months apart. So you can just kind of see what you all said. And I thought it was fun to kind of throwback Wednesday here to just take a quick look at that. I imagine that is probably still very similar today.
Yeah, the one thing I noticed in these graphics, and actually we asked the question of the folks who signed up for this one, kind of, the same question, what's important to you? That top blue bar continues to be the majority of it. So although I think, the other options are shades of that, perhaps, identifying and understanding silos of data could also be because I need to delete junk or because I'm getting ready for migration or that kind of thing. So it just tells me that this is still a problem that people have. And for me, this is where I've always wanted to get to in my career. How do we actually get information management out of the front lines and being done in an automatic way so we make the best use out of human eyeball time? And this is getting us really close. So hopefully that blue bar will become less of a generic problem, and we'll have more specific problems identified and queued up to solve.
What's interesting is, as I sort of look at this and reflect back also, in over the course of this session, again, it was about a year, how much I saw a change in client RFIs and RFPs over this time frame, from sometimes being very, I would say, sort of one-offy in nature, like I have a file share, I need to figure out what it is and then get rid of it. And like that was the extent of the discussion, and how those have really morphed over this same time frame into, well, that's one thing I need to do, but then I need to look at everything else, and then I need to continually assess. This sort of notion of data is constantly changing and the information governance job is never done. That's a big change I've seen from when we first started with session one. And I think you see that actually in the migration bar getting smaller, because a lot of people sort of started out as, well, migration is the thing I have to do, or delete rot is the thing I have to do, but then they realized, no, I have to do all of this and perpetually.
That's kind of interesting. So you looked at that blue bar like almost the other side of the coin from me.
Yeah.
That's indicative of us usually. That's great. That's interesting. But perhaps that's it. And that's great. If what this is signifying is actually what I would call an awakening around the fact that our need to classify information is not a pinpoint, one-off kind of thing. It's a way of life. And so for anybody who's on this session who has a background in records and information management, we've been saying that forever. But to get people to buy into that and join with us in that and invest in that has been the challenge. And so if that's starting to change for whatever reason that might be, I think that's good for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Well, Julie, our first question has come in. We said, ask us anything. Here comes the first question, and I think I'll take it. And I know Anna, who works with me here at Valora, is probably floating around on the line out there. If I somehow mess this up, Anna, feel free to jump in. So the question is, I had a general question about this webinar series. Where on your website are the replays, since I've seen some, but I think I missed one even though I signed up for it. Thanks. My apologies if you signed up and didn't get one. That would be on us. But I know everybody's email is a giant hodgepodge, so it's possible it's floating around in there. The answer is, if you go to the resources section on Valora's website, there's a screen that will pop up that invites you to kind of join our mailing list and our club and our fan club and all that. You don't have to do that, but of course we'd love it if you did. But even if you don't, you will see a whole bunch of different webinars, presentations, events, and things in that resources section. So that's where the links to the videos live. They're also on our YouTube channel. Valora has a YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube, don't just put in Valora because that's the name of some rock group. Put in Valora Technologies and you'll get us.
Now I want to go check that out.
Yeah, eventually I have to meet this group and be like, hey, hi, write a song for us. But, we'll see how that goes over.
Yeah, you need a jingle.
What?
You need a jingle.
We need a jingle, and who better to write it than Valora the group?
Right.
So that's where you can find the videos and the links to the videos. When we send out the follow-up from this session, we will be sure to include the link to this, number 5, as well as the original 4. So you'll get it that way again as well.
Absolutely. All right, guys, so the question and answer part is open. Start typing into that little question box and ask us something. In the meantime, do you want to ask me a question or do you want me to ask you a question?
Oh, let's go for your completely blind questions. Hit me.
Yes, I have a whole list of them. Where should I start? Maybe I'll just start with, so one of the questions that came in during the registration process was, will the solutions, and I assume that means Valora specific solutions, are those installed on-prem, and does your system require content to be ingested?
Oh, excellent. 2 really good questions. So the answer is on-prem is certainly an option, but it's not the only option. So Powerhouse can be on-prem, behind the firewall, direct access to data that way. It can also be in any number of cloud options. Epic has a very powerful and strong cloud. That is a great option for either clients that are kind of already utilizing that, often for e-discovery or some kind of like document review type purposes. So that's a nice tight integration we have with Epic, no big surprise. And then there's also options for Azure Cloud, for AWS, for Google's cloud, and then Valora also has a cloud here if for some reason a client wants to utilize that. So there's quite a few cloud options. And I'll just pick up on something that I've been asked that's related to this question. I get asked this a lot, which is I have split data. I have some on-prem, I have some in the cloud. Like we've kind of half migrated to Office 365, or we've only migrated email as of this year. Some kind of crazy mishmash of data storage. Where do I put the Powerhouse engine? And the answer is you can put it in either. You don't have to put it in both. You don't need on-prem and cloud. So if you have an on-prem Powerhouse, as long as you provide it access to the cloud, you give it permission to crawl your space in the cloud or your tenant, then it will handle both on-prem data and cloud data. Now, the flip is also true. If you prefer to have Powerhouse in the cloud, you might want it sort of in the same tenant with your data or different. Again, as long as the permissions are set up, that's fine. And then the cloud Powerhouse can actually reach back down through tunneling, essentially through a Connect Safe tunnel into the on-prem and run that way too. So you can kind of have any flavor that floats your boat or makes your IT group happy. And you can also kind of evolve from one to the other, typically from on-prem to cloud over time. So lots and lots of options there. And then the second half of your question, Julie, was, I'm trying to remember what you said. There was a second piece.
Yes, does it require content to be ingested? But before you answer that, I'm just going to throw this out there and you can answer that and what I'm about to ask you together. So that was a good discussion on kind of where you can deploy these kinds of tools, and yours specifically. But maybe dig in just a little bit deeper on that and talk about the reasons for choosing one or the other, besides the ones you just mentioned, like IT, it makes IT happy, or does it make them mad? Big one. But, does it make a difference being physically closer to the data or logically closer to the data or not? I think would be a good bit to dig into.
That's great. Yes. So as I think Julie's kind of suggesting, really, yeah, it does make a difference. You're always going to have better performance if the solution and the data are kind of near each other. So if, let's say, the bulk of your data is on-prem, then probably it makes more sense to have the solution on-prem. And what I mean by better performance is just kind of like faster throughput, I mean, think about it. You're sort of, I'll just answer the other part of the question actually here, which is that Powerhouse will support either ingestion or process in place or a blend for different silos. So it doesn't have to ingest, it certainly can ingest, but typically we don't ingest unless for some reason we know a priori that that data is going to be moving, it's going to be migrating. So here's now we put the pieces of the puzzle together. So if we're, let's say, moving data from on-prem to the cloud as part of a, kind of remediation and migration effort all in one shot, then yeah, you might as well ingest it. In general, ingesting is going to be a teeny weeny bit faster because the data is literally as close to Powerhouse as it can possibly get. But that's a small delta between, let's say, on-prem versus ingested. You can do on-prem, process in place, and probably negligible difference in terms of performance. But if you're kind of offset of each other, that is, if the solution's in the cloud and it's tunneling down to on-prem data, then yeah, there is going to be a little bit of a lag. You could potentially open yourself up to transfer issues, what data is allowed to go where. And then for those of you that are thinking globally or internationally in scope, you do want to be careful for something like, if your data is on-prem in France and your cloud's in Germany, is that okay? Or God forbid, your cloud is in the US, I'm sure, I know, nobody will let you touch their European data that way. So those are some considerations that kind of pop up regarding cloud is whose cloud, where is it? It's not really performance-based per se, but more data privacy, cross-border type questions.
Awesome. So since we don't have any new questions coming in, I'm going to poke at you some more on this one because this is a good thread and going lots of places. So on the topic of process in place or ingest, let's kind of dig through that one a little bit. What are the pros and cons of that, or what are some scenarios where one is better than the other? And it may be in relation in particular to if you're looking at auto classification, not as a looking backwards one-time cleanup project, but more of an evergreen, always-on classification kind of tool.
Right. So what Powerhouse actually does is not very different, whether it ingests or processes in place. So it's not like, you're giving up something by using one or the other. It's more a question usually of whether that data is going to be moving. So you tend to see the ingest. So the kind of the status quo is process in place. And that's when you're saying, I really just want to know what this data is. I want to have all those rich metadata tags. You guys surely remember that from sessions past. So you want to have those rich metadata tags. You want to run all those nifty rules, but you don't literally want to do anything. You don't want to take an action. You just want the knowledge. So if that is your kind of primary use case, or you want to take your actions outside of this effort. Sometimes people have custom tools. Sometimes they want to throw a manual process on that. So, depending what your kind of intended workflow or use case for the data once analyzed is, as I say, the sort of status quo is just process in place. That's particularly good for, let's say, if we're working with a records management group or a compliance group who doesn't technically own that data belongs to some business unit or multiple business units, and they're not really at liberty to start moving stuff around, but they do need to know, maybe for litigation, for compliance, for GDPR, they do need to know what's in it. So in that sort of scenario, nothing's moving, but you need the knowledge. That's really where process in place is your answer. It's your go-to. Where you start to have ingestion is when stuff is going to be moving. So obviously migration, duh. That's the, that's the main mover, shaker scenario for data. I have to get it from point A to point B. I have to get it from here to the web. We're retiring this system. I have to get it to a new system. Anytime you have that, basically you might as well ingest. There's no point really to process in place. You might as well ingest and move kind of as one fell swoop. The other place where sometimes data is moving, and I think you were going here, Julie, is kind of newly created or newly arrived data. So I'll take the most obvious case. Let's say you're some sort of effective clearinghouse. You're receiving claim forms for something, or order forms, or some sort of transactional documentation. That is going to be newly created every time something happens. And so it's entering some sort of large funnel anyway, and probably needs some sort of workflow routing to go where it needs to go. Let's say it's some sort of transaction. Okay, it's documentation for that. So here's the documentation. There's going to be some, kind of metadata or tagging of that, then some rules assessment, and then that file or that document needs to be sent on its way. Maybe it's going to billing, maybe it's going to some sort of authorization, maybe it's going into records. But that it's not staying in that kind of front end intake holding tank. It needs to be sent on its way. So whenever you have that workflow data moving, that is a really good opportunity to ingest.
Awesome. Good stuff. All right, I'm going to send a plea out to the folks on here. I know you guys have burning questions. It's just not possible for you to not have a question about such a cool topic. So think those out and type them in, please. Until we get something happening over there, I'm going to continue to poke at Sandy.
I was going to throw one at you. I was going to throw one at you.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead. Go ahead.
This was from a prior webinar, but I think it's still incredibly relevant, and I get asked this question all the time. On seek and destroy, which is one of Julie's favorite phrases, so I'm sure she'll explain that to all of you. On seek and destroy, do you have any metrics or benchmarks or case studies that can be used to demonstrate ROI?
Yeah, so you're right, seek and destroy. So the other side of that is search and rescue. When I think about using file analysis and classification tools similar to Alora's tools, it's one or the other usually is the use case, right? So either we have a big pile of stuff and we think there's some bad stuff in it or some junk, and so we need to just find that stuff and get rid of it, or we think that there's important stuff in that big pile of thing and we need to go and rescue it and get it under proper management. And so this question is focusing on that. There's some bad stuff or some junky stuff that's wasting space and time and money, and we want to go get rid of it. And do we have any metrics or benchmarks or case studies that can be used to demonstrate ROI, return on investment, for a defensible deletion initiative? So, there's a ton of that kind of information out there in the world, and I have certainly anecdotal stories I can share. I'm sure Sandy does too. I think one of the important things to do when you're building any sort of business case around this is to understand what's important to your organization, and to understand who is going to be the ultimate buyer, or person who's going to write the check, because a defensible deletion initiative can be demonstrated in terms of ROI through risk reduction. That's entirely dependent, though, upon how your organization measures risk and ranks risk. It's easy for me to say. And it could also be a cost savings initiative. So you could look at, I had a client, here's a great example. I had a client who bought a similar set of technology because they had intended to do search and rescue. It was really a records management driven thing. They wanted to get this stuff under a policy, a retention schedule. And so they had this 40 plus terabytes of file share data, and they didn't really know what it was in there, but they wanted to go get the good stuff and get under management. And so once they actually deployed the tool against the data actually came back and said, that's not your most compelling use case. Your most compelling use case is you have over 40% exact duplication. So that volume of exact duplicate, while there was a risk driver to get started, it actually ended up being a pure cost and complexity ROI that drove them to make the full investment in performing the full project and investing in all the technology. So it was
So can I jump in with something?
Yeah.
Because in true Sandy Julie fashion, I have a client, it was exactly the opposite. Exactly. So so here you go, everybody. Which one are you more? Are you more Julie or more Sandy on this one? So we had a client that was specifically looking to, they wanted to do all these other things, but they were going to make the sale internally by selling reduction. And sure enough, they had about 30-40% rot. And so they were like, see, rot. It's all worth it. And as soon as we got in there, yeah, we found the rot, but we found all this stuff that was supposed to be under legal hold. And everybody flipped out, like, oh my God, we would never have known, blah, blah, blah. So it completely went the other way of what you just described.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show you, at the end of the day, it's super important for you to know your business and your buyers, because, oftentimes those of us who are in this part of the business aren't actually the ones who hold the purse strings. Good on you if you are, but oftentimes we aren't, or we're in a consultant relationship, and so we're trying to convince a client to do something, or we have to understand what really their drivers are and be open to that. And so my best advice is to come up with more than one ROI lever for a defensible deletion initiative. So be able to demonstrate return in terms of risk mitigation, cost reduction, and soft cost avoidance through reducing the complexity in the workspace. Those, to me, are the three that I've gotten really good traction on. And they're three things that you can reasonably measure, as long as you decide on a measure and accept the assumptions of that measure. Soft costs are obviously the harder one, but to me, those are the ones that I've used the most successfully over the years. How about you, Sandy?
I completely agree with those three for sure. What I would add to this is, yes, there are lots of benchmarks and there's other metrics and, people who've kind of come before and what experts will tell you. But one of the best ways to use this type of technology, it's fast, it's accurate, and on a kind of unit basis, it's sort of ridiculously cost effective. So one of the things you can do is make your own benchmark. How do you do that? With a proof of concept or a pilot project. Sampling will go a really long way. Why not, pull a sample of your data, run it through as a kind of small scale pilot and see what you have. If you sample cleverly, and again, Julie can help you with that. We can help you with that, obviously. If you're smart about your sampling, it will be indicative of the larger population. So you can build your own ROI on your own data. So we are strong proponents of a proof of concept for the reasons we just described. Essentially build your own ROI, and you get one other kind of bang for the buck in doing that, which is you'll also get a realistic sense of what your processing throughput looks like. Or do you work for an industry where every document is 600 pages and full of graphics, like construction or design? Then, your single file is going to run a lot slower than, say, an organization who every single thing is documented in email and every file is, 20K. Those are going to fly through. So again, the POC not only builds you your own ROI, it's your own benchmark. It's almost like a blood sample for yourself. It also will let you know exactly what kind of processing scale, or in the case of Powerhouse, what tier structure you need to get through your data.
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of that concept. Some of my favorite memories are when I sat with clients who, for the first time, viewed their own data through the lens of a tool like this. It really, you might have a sense of what's on your file shares. It's got a file structure, and people have named folders, and the documents appear to be relatively well named. So you think you know what's in it until you really dig into it and pull out all of the details about the data. All of a sudden, new contours arise, things that were lurking in the dark that you didn't see all of a sudden are right in front of you. And so again, that small scale approach is a great way to not only validate what you think you already know about your data, but to give you some new ammunition about what may be in your data and the right approach to take for your organization. I also say, I found over the years working with various different clients and trying to justify these kinds of technologies, another important way to talk about the value of doing something like this is, what's the cost if we don't? I'm not a big fearmonger kind of person, but there is a net present value, and not just from a purely financial investment perspective, but from a net present value to the overall organization. I mean, some of these intangibles are like reputational damage, risk of data breach, things like that. And so, being creative about the way you articulate value when you go to justify some sort of investment in technology, people, process, whatever, in the end works out better than coming at it just from a strict financial perspective. Like, if we spend $10 on this, I will be able to save $50 in storage costs. If it's just a one-faceted or one-dimensional argument, it's much harder to get done. Real quickly on the heels of that, I'll say one of the best ways to get something invested in is to find a project that's already funded and attach yourself to that, because they've already convinced somebody there's an ROI to do it. So migrations are good ones to try and jump on the bandwagon with and say, hey, I know we're migrating all this stuff from here to there. Wouldn't it be awesome if we didn't migrate the stuff we don't need? Can I jump onto this project and help out? Any thoughts about that, Sandy?
No, I think you summed it up pretty well, actually.
Wow. Okay, she's speechless.
I'm speechless. Enjoy the silence.
Right. Well, I'll just fill it with another question. So this will be a kind of a detailed question, but it's one that I get asked a lot and have over the years doing this kind of work, and it's about date. Do you use last modified date, date created, date finalized, the date in the document, the date in metadata? Talk to me about your thoughts around dates and when to use which and what to be careful of, things you've seen go awry.
Okay, that's a great question, especially because there are so many dates that we utilize in just general business activity. And there are so many things that are capturable by a strong auto-classification engine. So, of course, my answer is always going to be, why not take them all? To capture them at the outset, then comes the harder thing of, okay, well, and this was really your question, what do I use when? And that's where the strength of a rules engine comes into play, because not all dates are the same, and they're certainly not all the same. You guys probably remember when Julie and I talked about context. Date is a really good kind of context data element, because it's not just a sequence of numbers. It implies a moment in time. And so for starters, dates have a sequence. So if you have multiple dates off of a file, let's say you have a created date and a last modified date, sure. You also have all the modification dates if you're able to get at them. And then you have the body content dates also. Is there a signature date? Is there an effective date? Is there a authorized signature date, and so on and so forth? So the dates have a chronology, and that's important, just in terms of kind of what happened first, second, third. So they have that kind of sequence aspect. And then they also have often like an authority aspect. Well, when you look at the date, is it a signature date, and who signed it? That has a major ramification for that date. Or a date has some sort of legal element, it's an effective date or a termination date, things like that. So being able to know dates at all, and then B, being able to know what the specific dates are and when they're relevant by context, that is huge. So here's another piece of context that kind of helps color the notion of a date. So I already talked about dates kind of people and signatures. Another big one is the document type. So are you looking at dates from a contract? Are you looking at dates from some sort of transaction? Are you looking at dates in a correspondence string? So each of those is a very, very different use case of just date, the concept of date. So this is where, to Julie's earlier point about know your organization, or maybe my kind of corollary to that of what do you want to accomplish? Because you have all these dates available, and now you have to sort of think a little bit, well, which dates are more important than others, either by virtue of what the date is or by what the date is referring to in context. And that's where, again, that kind of sophisticated rules engine, or even a hierarchical rules engine, that might say something like, well, the signature date is important unless you have an authorized signature date, then that one's more important. But that's only important if you're still within the effective date window. And you see what I'm doing? I'm building kind of strength of how one date might trump another date based on its context. So there's lots of fun things you can do with date, especially beyond. I think most people tend to look at date as like just what was the date of the doc, and 90 days has passed, therefore, X. You can have a lot more contextual detail that gives you a much richer set of options other than time has passed. It was kind of a detailed answer, Julie.
You kind of blew my mind there for a second. That was great. It actually led me to another question that we had come in that's asking, what are some of the most important things to look for when comparing tools like Powerhouse? And I'll say, just on the heels of Sandy's great discussion about dates, is the level of detail and accuracy that the tools can get into. There are free things out there in the world that can do some high-level categorization, is what I'll call it. Maybe not classification, but categorization. But they only use readily available, a handful of things, and it doesn't test what it's telling you. So, for example, it might organize things by file type, but it doesn't check the MIME type. So if it says it's a .doc, it's going to believe it's a .doc. It's not going to test that, validate it, and prove it out. You want a tool that's going to do those kinds of things, go to that level. And with the dates in particular, the more dates, to Sandy's point, the more dates you can get at and capture and retain the context of, the better. So getting into the nitty gritty and going down to the binary level are really important aspects of tools like this. On the classification side, or on the categorization side, I should say, where the next level is, well, I guess there's also one there, is just plain, power and throughput. How does the thing scale, and does it scale, and where does it break, and what are the considerations there? The classification piece is this a one-time classification, or am I a records manager who needs to, embed my retention schedule into the tool and repeat its application over time, over different sets of data? So knowing who you are, again, and what you're up to, keep those kinds of things in mind, because one tool might be great at, a one-time classification kind of thing, but it really breaks down over time or over different sets of data, or it takes a lot of rework. You have to do it again and again, and do the same amount of effort. You can't just reuse work previously done. So I'll stop there, Sandy. What other kinds of things, have you seen be important to folks who are talking with you and considering your tools?
So I wrote down a whole bunch while you were talking, actually, and you hit some of the ones that I had, which was very interesting. I'm like, okay, check. So one thing that comes up, and again, people probably self-select to Valora for this, is the variety of material that can be analyzed. So for example, an obvious choice would be, there are some tools that only work on email. And that's because email has a lot of embedded metadata, so it's quick and easy, and those tools are fairly simplistic. But, the minute you hit a PowerPoint, whoa, what's that? So you want to kind of look at a little bit at your file types. You have a lot of PDF. Most clients do have tons of PDF, and remember that a PDF can be anything. So you really need to go deeper, and this is really highlighting the difference between file extension and document type. A lot of tools kind of really only work at the file extension level. So as long as that extension is .pst or .msg, they're okay. But the minute you get to .pdf or JPEG, forget it. So you want to kind of look at your data and say, do I need to go that extra level? It's not just a PDF, but it's a cash flow statement. To be able to recognize that, and I want to do a certain thing with that cash flow statement. This comes up a lot in retention situations because retention policies are not typically written as if it's a PDF, keep it for 10 years. It's if it's an employee record. And so you need to know that that's an application, an employee application, and therefore it's an employee record. It's not, PDF isn't going to tell you anything. So when you need to get to that a little bit deeper level of understanding about content, that is one of the things that separates out some of the solutions. Another example of that, of the depth, would be language support. Some tools are very simplistic. They basically only run in English. So if you are a large multinational organization and you were regularly receiving content in 6, 7 different languages, you need a tool that's going to be able to work across that. And in some cases, like the way Powerhouse does, is to possibly provide a common denominator language, which we will convert things into English so that, like let's say you're headquartered here in the US, you now can comprehend and utilize content from all over the world, even though it was originally in the other language. So language concerns, being able to, so similarly, you can't say language concerns without saying cross-border and data privacy concerns, to be able to, for example, not just analyze, oh, hey, this file is, not been touched in 5 years, but it turns out it's extremely sensitive and it contains all kinds of PII. So, that's probably even more important than the retention period, is the data privacy aspects to that file. So you want to have a tool that can handle, that's not sort of just a one-trick pony, can handle these multiple issues for classification and to try and figure out what's more important than other things. For example, be able to identify that something really belongs under legal hold. That's going to trump every other concern probably that's out there. Although we should, Julie, somebody write this down. We should do a webinar at some point about who's on top. Is it data privacy, i.e. GDPR, or is it legal hold? Because this is a raging debate right now, and it depends who you ask. So,
well, sure.
Yeah, well, ask
yeah,
some.
That's funny.
Yeah, so we should come back to that. That one keeps coming up. Again, if you are a multinational organization or you have clients who are, you will be facing this issue in the next 12 months. I guarantee it. So we need to put a pin in that one. As far as comparisons, another big thing that's been coming up lately as people get more comfortable with the technology itself is this notion of, okay, I have this incredibly powerful tool. It does all this cool stuff. Who's going to manage that? And what happens when I need to change it? Some tools are very simplistic and, they're sort of easy to use. They're straight out of the box. They don't do a whole lot. But what happens when your needs change? GDPR kind of crept up on a lot of people, and a lot of these tools have no mechanism to manage that at all. So, things are constantly in flux. They're constantly changing. You may suddenly find yourself faced with a litigation and you need to go crawl through stuff. You need to have a tool that's not so simplistic that it has no adaptation, or is so complex that, you have to have a PhD to use it. If Valora errs a little, it might be towards that latter category, but we are working on that to try and make the UI a little simpler for everybody.
For me, I asked her for that. It was for me.
It's free. Lots of people, Julie, that you have quite the chorus now, and I'm happy to say that there have been many steps in that regard actually, and every day it gets easier. Like I can almost do all of it, so I'm pretty psyched about that.
Awesome. Hey, I wanted to dig in just for a second on encrypted data. So one of the things that's important to me as a potential consumer of a technology like this for my company or for our clients is how do you handle exceptions? Because encrypted data for which you do not have access to keys becomes an exception. Talk to me about your thoughts on that, how Valora handles those kinds of things, other, pitfalls to be aware of.
So yeah, that definitely happens. And there's the sort of malicious exception, like a virus. Then there's the sort of accidental exceptions, like, it's encrypted and, nobody has the password, nobody has the keys. Another flavor of accidental encryption would be, for whatever reason, it's a bunch of originally handwritten stuff. Somebody scanned it in and now it's sort of an electronic document, but it doesn't have any text or any real content per se. And so all of those would kind of fall through the sieve as exceptions. And the way that there's a lot of ways to handle exceptions. The way that we typically recommend is that they actually be marked as such exception, and then like kind of promoted or migrated to an exception handling workflow, which of course is going to have people in it somewhere. A lot of the regular workflow is kind of purely automated from start to finish, or it has certain like authorization points, and as soon as the authorization is given, boom, it's back to automated again. Whereas exception handling very often is going to have either entirely or a portion being handled by hand. So there's a couple ramifications to that. One, you have to have some sort of resource to be able to do it. And that can be a resource at the client. It could be a resource at like a service provider like Epic or maybe even Council. It could be, believe it or not, even though Valora is selling technology, we also offer that type of exception handling service too, if that's the way the client wants to go. So you need a resource to do it. You need tools to do it. Powerhouse actually comes with, it's an option. It's called Quality Control User Interface, QCUI, for exactly exception handling. Although you don't have to, you can use any technique you like. And then you need to kind of scale your exception handling to meet the amount of exceptions that you're generating. So your exception rate might be really teeny tiny, a 0.5%. But if you have 40 million files, 0.5%, somebody else do that math, it's a big number. You're not just going to sit down one afternoon and bang that out. So again, remember we were talking earlier about benchmarking. That's another thing that you would want to benchmark is what's your exception rate, and therefore what level, what amount of resources, and that could be both people and time, because if you don't have enough people or you just don't care to deal with exceptions right now, they're going to pile up and you're going to build up a backlog. So there are quite a few considerations around exceptions. And that's why it's really handy to have a sense of what's your exception rate. And by the way, that might change from data population to data population. That is highly variable.
Yeah, one other thing that I want to make sure we get in here is we're running up on about 9 minutes here. So maybe two things, but certainly reference data. So, in this idea of auto-classification, we're going to be able to, the system will be able to classify content without human interaction, but it has to have some sense of order to that. So if you think about a law firm as an example, law firms have billing systems in which that is the system of record for client and matter numbers and other related information to those numbers, client name, key contact, whatever. Having your auto classification system be able to leverage external resource data is critically important in the evergreen, always on kind of application of these tools. If you have to manually update the tool with a new list every day or every week, especially for a law firm, those numbers change every day, at least adding some new ones in, and by every month you're closing out some matters and getting them off the book. So that would be a lot of time and effort and potential error if that was something you had to do manually and it couldn't actually interact with a reference system on the outside. Not Sandy?
Yeah, actually, thank you so much for mentioning that. That was one of the items I wrote down and then didn't mention. And when you were asking, differentiators or things to look for, that's a huge item because we call them guidance systems, but same thing, guidance reference. Those are what are really going to drive the auto classification engine because Julie's right. Things are changing constantly. The bigger your organization, or the more data under management that you have, the more complex those things get. I mean, if you think of, a big Fortune 500 type of organization, there are people being hired and terminated every single day. So if one of the things that you're looking for, or you're using to help classify content is employee name, you do not want to try and keep up with that manually. It would be impossible. And so you have to have that integration, that querying of a guidance system to keep the engine running in sync with the operation. In fact, that's one of the best arguments for having a go forward approach, because every backfile or every kind of accumulated mountain of data is by definition out of date. And what's fascinating to me, we're just getting involved with a client now that has so much data that they are out of date by the end of the day. And that's just a
Whoa.
fascinating concept. Yes, they receive, I think I figured it out, like they receive or they generate 200 new files every minute. So think about that. You have to have some sort of system that is keeping in sync with that, or by the end of the day, whatever you thought the kind of world order was is completely out of date. And that, just to tweak Julie now, that is where we're going with the IoT universe, because it's a constant data stream. If Alexa were sitting in your organization, forget your house, let's say it's sitting in your organization, capturing every dialogue that's going on, think about that content arrival rate and how you would keep up with it. You would have to have guidance systems driving this. And what we're really describing basically is AI at this point. So there, I've rolled this completely forward, Julie.
Yes, that's good. It's perfect. We have 5 minutes left. So kind of last call for any questions people want to type into the box. And thanks, Sandy, so much for bringing in the IoT, because it keeps me awake at night and terrifies me. And it's things like Alexa or why. I think the IoT in general is not. I think there's good, but what's the Spider-Man? I'll mess that. With great power comes great responsibility, and that's where I just worry that we're not prepared for the responsibility yet. Maybe GDPR is going to help us there with kind of the privacy by design and by default. But I'm just not seeing, at least here in the U.S., just yet. But you're right. The reality is data volumes and data velocity are only going to continue to rise. Data velocity, I think, is the one that's on the faster upswing than actual volume of content, discrete volume. And it's something we're going to have to deal with. And so asking one system to do everything and know everything by itself is a non-starter in that type of environment. So, as you're looking at these tools, ask those questions. Can I leverage my HRIS system to get employee data, up-to-date employee data? Can I leverage our billing system to get client information, or whatever it is that you need, and understand how that works and how much manual effort there may be and what pitfalls or risks there might be. As far as AI goes, I think where auto classification started several years ago was the promise of predictive analytics and machine learning and things like that. And I think those all have a place, but really to inform the rules and to improve application of the rules, not to set the rules or to validate external system data like that. So while machine learning and predictive analytics and things like that are good and important and they should happen, like you should be able to cluster things, right? Put all of the exact duplicates in one cluster, put all of these types of content that are similarly have similar content into one bucket. like a PDF and all the Word version draft should be in one bucket as a near duplicate, for example. Those are all good and important technologies, but it doesn't complete the story if they can't handle that reference data from an always on kind of evergreen perspective. And as a records manager, that's my holy grail, is to figure out how we can do records management without the armies of people that we've been forced to use to do it, particularly those who should be on the front line, serving clients, saving the world, making bunches of money, whatever it is they do.
I'll pick up on that. We had a funny moment the other day when a client asked a great question, which I think really kind of brings this all to the moment. They said, okay, so if Powerhouse can essentially sort of read and interpret our retention policy, and then if we change our retention policy, it's aware of that because it's a guidance system and it's querying that and it's in sync. What happens if one of the documents that it encounters is a retention policy? Is it going to go, because somebody had it floating out there? Is it like a virus, and is it going to go reconfigure itself and go screw everything up? And I thought that was just a brilliant, brilliant question. And the answer, fortunately for everybody, is no, it's not. Because, and this is the difference between kind of blind AI running amok and guided AI that has, direction that it follows. So no, just because you sort of seed a data population with a retention policy chucked in there, you're not going to undo, it's almost like a virus. You purposely screw everything up. No, because there's only one place that is the sort of location of record, if I can, that is the legitimate home for that data, and any other instances are literally just a passing by retention policy, not the location that probably, since now I've told you all how to do it, that will probably have to have a magic key that Powerhouse can unlock so that it can do that. I could see that coming within the year. So just a fun little way to bring it all full circle.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are just about at time. And so I wanted to say thank you to Sandy and her team for getting all this pulled together, and for Sarah Grace on the Epic side, and to all of you for joining us for this Encore session. This one was super fun. I loved being unstructured. Sandy and I could talk about this stuff for days. So thanks again for your time and attention. We'll be sending out a note to all those who registered with a link to the recording and the previous session. So thanks again, and enjoy your day.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.